A moving story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She said it was her first time, but cried after the kiss. What he didn't know was that gentle touch reopened wounds buried for decades. A forbidden love, a religious secret, and a passion that could destroy everything. Watch this story until the end, you'll be surprised. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The road leading to Mist Haven home wound between hills covered, with eucalyptus and tall grass, disappearing and reappearing between seemingly endless curves. Emily Wilson tightened her backpack strap against her shoulder as the bus rumbled up the last hill before their destination. Through the foggy window, she observed the morning mist dancing lazily between the valleys, like ghosts of untold stories. October brought the smell of damp earth and decomposing leaves. The air was dense, filled with a melancholy that seemed to spring from the soil itself. When the driver announced the stop, Emily rose slowly, adjusted the dark dress that covered her knees, and descended the 3 worn steps of the bus with the caution of someone carrying something very fragile in their chest. Mist Haven home stood before her like a prayer made of stone and lime. 3 floors of large, symmetrical windows, wrought iron balconies, and walls that were once white, now stained by time to a shade of aged cream. Ivy climbed the sides of the building, and in the front garden, ancient rose bushes exuded a sweet perfume that contrasted with the solemnity of the place. Emily breathed deeply and walked along the cobblestone path to the main entrance. Her sandals made a soft noise against the pavement, and she noticed how the sound seemed muffled, as if the house itself swallowed the noises of the outside world. Next to the solid wooden door, a discreet plaque announced, "Mist Haven Home for the Elderly. Care and dignity for senior citizens." The director who received her was a middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled into a rigid bun and gold-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Harrison had the kind of posture that suggested decades of dealing with bureaucracies and small daily tragedies. Her eyes, however, were kind when she examined the documents Emily handed her. "Nursing, graduated from University of Virginia," Mrs. Harrison murmured, leafing through the resume. "Experience in palliative care at Springfield Memorial, excellent references." She raised her eyes over her glasses. "What brings you here, dear?" "A professional with your profile could work in any hospital in Springfield." Emily felt the familiar weight of the question. It was always the same doubt in people's eyes. Why would someone young and qualified choose to bury themselves in a place like this? She had rehearsed the answer many times during the bus ride. "I want to care for people who need time," she said, and her voice came out softer than intended. "In hospitals, everything is rushed. Here, I can truly be present." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was that Emily had fled from a past that suffocated her, from a city where every corner held a painful memory, from a name that haunted her like a curse. Fled to a place where no one knew her, where she could be just Emily, the gentle nurse, and not Emily, the girl whom nobody believed. Mrs. Harrison seemed to accept the explanation. "Well, you've arrived at a good time. We're short-staffed, and the residents have special needs. Many have been here for years. Some haven't received visitors in a long time. They become attached to those who care for them." The home had 52 residents, spread across 3 floors. The ground floor housed the common areas: TV room, library, chapel, and dining hall. The first floor was reserved for the more autonomous, elderly, while the second concentrated those who needed intensive care. The basement, explained Mrs. Harrison, functioned as storage and laundry, in addition to housing some special rooms for cases requiring isolation. Emily was introduced to the staff: 3 nurses, 2 nursing assistants, a physical therapist, a nutritionist, and 2 caregivers. All women, all with that air of serene tiredness that comes from dealing daily with human fragility. They received her with professional courtesy, but Emily noticed the curious glances. It was common for new staff to arrive at Mist Haven home, but it wasn't common for them to be so young or have such solid qualifications. Her first day was dedicated to meeting the residents: Mrs. Eleanor, 92, a former elementary school teacher, who still corrected the grammar of anyone who conversed with her; Mr. Joseph, 87, a retired postal worker who still remembered the address of half the city. Mrs. Mercedes, who had been a seamstress and now spent her days embroidering napkins with a precision that defied arthritis. Mrs. Antonia, a former midwife who carried in her eyes the gleam of someone who had helped hundreds of lives come into the world. Each carried a story, and Emily discovered she had an ability to listen to them, not in a hurry, not pretending interest, but with genuine attention that made the elderly's eyes light up. Perhaps it was because she herself knew the weight of silence, the need to be truly seen by someone. At the end of the day, when the sun began to hide behind the hills, Emily found her own room in the annex designated for staff. It was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the back garden. She arranged her few belongings in the wooden dresser, some clothes, books, a rosary she didn't use but couldn't discard, and the navy blue notebook that had accompanied her since adolescence. She sat on the narrow bed and opened the notebook to the first blank page in months. With the pen suspended above the paper, she tried to find words to describe that first day, that strange feeling of finally being in a place where she could breathe. But the words didn't come. Instead, the memory came. 15 years. That was her age when her life split in two. 15 when she discovered that not all hands extended in the name of God are blessings. 15 when she learned that the word of a girl is worth less than the reputation of a holy man. 15 when the world taught her that some truths are too heavy to be spoken aloud. Father Alexander Sullivan. The name still made her stomach contract even after so many years. He had been loved by all in the small town where she grew up. A man of faith, dedicated, who visited the sick and consoled the afflicted. To the community he was a saint. To Emily, he was the end of childhood. She closed the notebook without writing anything and got up to have dinner in the staff dining room. The food was simple but well prepared, and her colleagues tried to include her in conversations about the home's routine, the peculiarities of some residents, the small dramas and joys of everyday life. Emily participated politely, but part of her remained on guard, observing, analyzing, protecting herself. It was during dessert that Mrs. Harrison casually mentioned, "Oh, Emily, I forgot to tell you. Next week we'll have a new doctor, Dr. Michael Carter. He'll be in residence taking over the clinical care of our patients." One of the nurses, Marlene, raised her eyebrows. "Resident doctor? Here? That's new." "Yes," agreed Mrs. Harrison, stirring sugar into her coffee. "He comes from Washington, general practitioner, specialization in geriatrics. Seems to have excellent references." "And why would someone with those qualifications end up here?" asked Sonia, the physical therapist. Mrs. Harrison shrugged. "People have their reasons. It's not our place to judge." Emily noticed there was something unsaid in those words, a reticence that suggested that Dr. Michael Carter's arrival wasn't as simple as it seemed. But she kept the observation to herself. She, more than anyone, understood that not all refugees were chosen by chance. That night, Emily made her first night round. Mist Haven home acquired a different atmosphere in the darkness. The corridors, illuminated only by emergency lights, created long shadows on the walls, and the sounds became more distinct. Mr. Anthony's heavy breathing in room 7, Mrs. Constance's whispered prayers, the occasional creaking of a bed when someone turned during sleep. Emily walked slowly, checking each room, adjusting blankets, verifying if anyone needed water or medication. There was a peace in these simple gestures, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Here she wasn't Emily, the victim, she was Emily, the caregiver. Emily, who mattered. In room 15, she found Mrs. Betty awake, looking out the window at the garden bathed in moonlight. "Can't sleep, Mrs. Betty?" Emily asked softly. The elderly woman, who must have been about 80 and maintained an impressive lucidity, smiled. "At my age, dear, sleep is a luxury. I stay here thinking about life, you know? The things I did, the ones I didn't, the ones I'd still like to do." Emily sat in the chair next to the bed. "And what would you still like to do?" "See my granddaughter get married. She's been dating a young man for 5 years, but keeps stalling on deciding. Young people today are afraid of commitment. Mrs. Betty chuckled softly. And you, child? Do you have a boyfriend? The question caught Emily off guard. No, Mum. I don't have time for such things. Don't have time or don't want to have time. Mrs. Betty's eyes were penetrating, as if they could see beyond the carefully chosen words. Emily hesitated. It's complicated. Love is always complicated, dear, but it's also the only thing that makes life worth living. Don't let fear rob you of that. The words echoed in Emily's mind during the rest of the round. Fear. It was a small word to define what she felt, but perhaps it was the most accurate. Fear of trusting, fear of being touched, fear of being truly seen. Fear that someone would discover she was broken inside and decide she wasn't worth trying to fix. Back in her room, Emily finally managed to write in the blue notebook, "First day at Mist Haven Home. The elderly here have beautiful stories, lives that were worth living. Mrs. Betty talked about love and fear. Will I ever be able to not be afraid of being loved?" She closed the notebook and prepared for sleep, but it was slow to come. Through the open window, she heard the sounds of the night in the countryside, crickets singing, the wind in the eucalyptus leaves, the distant barking of a dog. It was different from the urban noises she was used to. Here, silence had space to exist, and she discovered that it calmed her. The following days established a routine that Emily embraced with gratitude. She woke at 6 in the morning, had breakfast in the staff dining room, participated in the shift change, and began her activities. She administered medications, checked vital signs, helped with personal hygiene, accompanied the meals of residents who needed assistance. In the afternoons, she often sat with them in the living room, listening to stories or simply keeping them company. It was during one of these afternoons that she got to know Mr. Romeo better, an 85-year-old man who had been a carpenter. His hands, deformed by arthritis, still made precise gestures when he described a piece he had created decades ago. "I made a dining table for my daughter when she got married," he told her, his eyes shining with the memory. Oak wood, carvings on the edges, 6 matching chairs. It took me 3 months to finish. She cried when she saw it. "It must have been beautiful," said Emily, genuinely interested. "It was. But you know what makes me most proud? It's still there in her house. My grandchildren do their homework on that table. That's how we become immortal, you know? By creating things that last longer than we do." Emily thought about this for the rest of the day. What had she created that would outlive her? What mark would she leave on the world? For a long time her life had been defined by what was taken from her, not by what she had built. Perhaps it was time to change that. On the Friday of her first week, Mrs. Harrison sought her out with a special request. "Emily, we have a resident in the basement who needs special care. It's a delicate situation." They descended the stairs that led to the lower floor. The basement was darker than the rest of the house, with a lower ceiling and a slightly damp smell. Mrs. Harrison guided her down a narrow corridor to a door at the end. "He's been here for 2 years," explained Mrs. Harrison in a low voice. "Vegetative state. We don't have much information about his past. He was brought by a religious organization that funds his care." Emily felt something strange in her stomach, a sensation she couldn't identify. "What's his name?" "Alexander. Alexander Sullivan." The world stopped. The narrow corridor seemed to close around Emily, and she had to lean against the wall to avoid staggering. Alexander. Father Alexander Sullivan. There, less than 10 feet from her, was the man who had destroyed her childhood, who had stolen her ability to trust, who had transformed her into a shadow of herself. "Emily, are you all right?" Mrs. Harrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. Yes, just a little dizzy. Must be the heavier air down here." But Emily was not all right. She was panicking. Of all the nursing homes in the country, of all the places where she could have sought refuge, she had chosen precisely the one where her tormentor was interned. Was it coincidence? Was it fate? Was it a cruel joke of the universe? "Can you take care of him?" asked Mrs. Harrison. "I know it's a big responsibility." Patients in a vegetative state require constant attention. Emily looked at the closed door. Behind it was the man who had taught her that the world was a dangerous place for girls who trusted too much, the man whose face still invaded her nightmares, whose hands she still felt in moments of greatest vulnerability. And now he was there, defenseless, dependent on her care. The irony was so intense it almost made her laugh or cry or scream. "Yes," she said, and her voice came out firmer than she felt. "I can take care of him." That night, Emily couldn't eat. She stayed in her room, lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling and trying to process what she had discovered. Part of her wanted to pack her bags and leave on the first transportation available. Another part, a darker part that she rarely acknowledged, felt a strange satisfaction in knowing that now she had power over him. She opened the blue notebook and wrote, "He is here. After 13 years, our paths have crossed again. I don't know if it's God testing me or the devil playing with me. I only know that I can't run away this time. Maybe it's time to face the past." Outside, the mist began to rise from the valleys, enveloping Mist Haven home in an ethereal embrace that isolated it from the rest of the world. Emily closed the notebook and prepared to sleep, knowing her life had just become infinitely more complicated. She didn't yet know that on Monday, a man would arrive at the home who would change everything again. A man whose past was connected to hers in ways neither of them could imagine. A man named Michael Carter, who also carried secrets related to Father Alexander Sullivan, and who would become both her salvation and her greatest trial. Mist Haven Home kept many secrets within its stone and lime walls, and Emily Wilson was about to discover that some secrets have the power to destroy, but others have the power to liberate. Michael Carter arrived on a rainy Monday, when October was already approaching its end, and the mornings dawned colder in the valleys around Mist Haven Home. Emily was in the dining hall serving breakfast to Mrs. Eleanor when she heard the rumble of a car engine climbing the steep road. Through the foggy window, she saw a black sedan stop in front of the main entrance. The man who got out of the car had broad shoulders and moved with the economy of gestures of someone who had learned not to waste energy. Even at a distance, Emily noticed that he carried only a small travel bag and a worn leather briefcase. He didn't seem like someone who was moving permanently, but rather someone who had learned to travel light, not to get attached to any place. "Must be the new doctor," murmured Marlene, who had approached the window to observe as well. "Handsome man." Emily looked away and turned her attention back to Mrs. Eleanor, who was complaining about the temperature of her coffee, but she noticed that her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. She didn't know if it was from the morning chill or the strange anxiety she had felt since waking up. She had slept poorly all night, dreaming of dark corridors and voices whispering her name. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Harrison appeared at the entrance to the dining hall, accompanied by the man Emily had seen arrive. Up close, he was even more imposing. He was about 6 feet tall, with brown hair with some grey streaks at the temples, and a 2-day beard that gave him a slightly neglected air. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and there was a sadness in them that seemed permanent, as if he had seen too much in life. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Carter," announced Mrs. Harrison. "He will be taking over the medical care of our residents." Michael greeted each staff member with a firm handshake and a respectful nod. When it was Emily's turn, she felt a shiver run down her spine at the moment their hands touched. His hands were large, calloused, and there was a contained gentleness in the way he greeted the women, as if he were conscious of his own strength and deliberately controlled it. "Emily Wilson, our newest nurse," said Mrs. Harrison. "She arrived last week." "Pleasure," said Michael, and his voice was deep with an accent that Emily couldn't completely identify. There was something Midwestern about it, but also traces of other regions, as if he had lived in different places. "The pleasure is mine, Doctor," responded Emily, and realized that her own voice came out lower than normal. Michael observed her, for a moment longer than was socially necessary, and Emily had the strange impression that he was trying to decipher something in her face. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her uncomfortable, but not in the negative way she was accustomed to. It was as if he could see through the mask she wore, but without judgment. "Dr. Michael will occupy the apartment on the second floor of the annex," continued Mrs. Harrison. "Emily, could you show him the routine of the house after lunch?" "Of course," Emily agreed, although a part of her wanted to find an excuse to avoid being alone with the man. Michael spent the morning with Mrs. Harrison, reviewing charts and getting to know the structure of the home. Emily observed him discreetly. Whenever her activities brought her near the administrative office, he seemed focused, asking specific questions about the medications used, the medical history of the more fragile residents, the emergency protocols. There was an evident competence in his questions, a familiarity with complex medical situations that confirmed his qualifications. But Emily also noticed other things: the way he frequently looked out the window as if expecting to see someone arriving, the way he repeatedly checked his cell phone although the device never rang, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders as if he were permanently prepared to flee. During lunch, Michael sat at the staff table and tried to participate in the conversations, but Emily noticed that he skillfully deflected whenever someone asked personal questions. Where had he worked before? Why had he chosen Misthaven Home? Did he have family? His answers were polite but vague, and he always found a way to redirect the conversation to others. "And you, doctor?" asked Sonia, the physical therapist. "Are you married? Do you have children?" Michael took a sip of water before answering. "No, I'm not married. And you all? How long have you worked here?" The change of subject was so smooth it almost went unnoticed, but Emily caught it. She knew well the art of avoiding personal questions. After lunch, Emily took Michael to see the 3 floors of the house. They started with the ground floor, where she explained the routine of community activities, meal times, the functioning of the library and chapel. "Are many of the residents religious?" asked Michael when they passed in front of the chapel. "Most of them, yes. Age brings that, I think, the need to believe in something greater." Michael stopped at the chapel door and looked at the simple altar, decorated only with a wooden crucifix and some flowers. "And you, are you religious?" The question caught Emily off guard. "I used to be now, and it's complicated." "Complicated how?" Emily hesitated. There was something in his voice, a sincerity that encouraged her to be honest, but she had learned to be cautious. "Let's say I lost faith in some things." Michael observed her with that penetrating gaze again. "I understand. Sometimes God allows bad things to happen to good people, and it becomes difficult to reconcile that with the idea of a just world." There was a pain in his words that echoed inside Emily's chest. "Exactly, as if he were asleep when we needed him most. Or perhaps," said Michael softly, "he is present in ways we still can't understand." They continued the visit in silence for a few minutes. On the first floor, Emily introduced the more independent residents. Michael greeted each one with patience, listening to their minor complaints with genuine attention, asking pertinent questions about symptoms and medications. Emily noticed how he knelt beside the wheelchairs to be at eye level with the elderly, how his hands were delicate when examining swollen joints and fragile skin. "You have the hands of a real doctor," commented Mr. Joseph after Michael checked his blood pressure. "You don't hurt, you don't rush. My previous doctor seemed like he was in a hurry to leave." Michael smiled for the first time since he had arrived, and the smile completely transformed his face. "Thank you, Mr. Joseph. It's important to take the necessary time." On the second floor, where the residents who needed more care were located, Michael demonstrated a competence that impressed Emily. He immediately identified which patients needed adjustments to their medication, suggested changes in the care of bedsores, and made observations about signs that the nurses had noticed but not been able to completely interpret. "Where did you study geriatrics?" asked Emily as they left Mrs. Mercedes' room, who had a respiratory infection. "I did my residency at St. Elizabeth's in Washington. Then I worked for a few years at Springfield Memorial." "And what brought you here?" Michael stopped in the middle of the corridor and faced her. "The same thing that brought you, I imagine, the need to start over." The response was so direct that Emily was left speechless. There was a brutal honesty in it, an admission that both were there fleeing from something. And there was also a silent challenge. He had shown a card. Now it was her turn. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves," Emily finally said. "Sometimes," agreed Michael, "and sometimes we just need to get lost, period." They descended to the basement last. Emily felt her heart accelerate as they approached the corridor where Alexander's room was located. She still hadn't entered the room since discovering who the patient was. She had found excuses to postpone the inevitable, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. "Down here we have the special rooms," she explained, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Patients who need isolation or very intensive care." Michael nodded, but Emily noticed that he seemed tense as well. When they reached the door to Alexander's room, she hesitated. "This is a special case. Patient in a vegetative state for 2 years, Alexander Sullivan." Michael's reaction was almost imperceptible, but Emily caught it. His eyes narrowed slightly, and she saw his fists clench for a moment before relaxing. "Alexander Sullivan," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Do you know him?" Michael took a while to respond. "The name sounds familiar. I see him." Emily opened the door with the key Mrs. Harrison had given her. The room was small, clean, with a high window that let in little light. On the hospital bed, connected to monitoring equipment, was the man who had haunted Emily's nightmares for years. Alexander Sullivan was unrecognizable. At 72, the body that was once imposing was now consumed by time and disease. The grey hair was thin, the skin yellowed and flaccid. The eyes, closed, were sunken in their orbits. He looked more like a ghost than a man. Emily felt a confused mixture of emotions upon seeing him. There was a dark satisfaction in seeing him so vulnerable, but also an unexpected sadness. That man had been powerful enough to destroy her childhood, and now he was reduced to practically nothing. Michael approached the bed and examined the patient with professional attention. He checked the cardiac monitor, tested the reflexes, examined the pupils with a small flashlight, but Emily noticed that his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "How long has he been like this?" asked Michael, without taking his eyes off the patient. 2 years, according to Mrs. Harrison. He arrived here in a vegetative state. Nobody knows much about what happened before. Michael continued the examination in silence. Emily observed him, trying to understand his reaction. There was something there, a tension that went beyond medical professionalism. "Who funds the treatment?" asked Michael finally. "A religious organization. I don't know the details." Michael nodded and moved away from the bed. "Let's go." They left the room and returned to the ground floor in silence. Emily felt that something had changed between them during those minutes in the basement, but she didn't know exactly what. "Thank you for the tour," said Michael when they reached the entrance hall. "You're a good guide." "You're welcome. If you have questions about anything, feel free to ask me." Michael hesitated, as if he were going to say something more, but he just nodded and headed to the annex where his apartment was located. That night, Emily couldn't concentrate on anything. During dinner, she caught herself looking at the table where Michael ate alone, always with a book open beside his plate. He seemed oblivious to the attempts of the other staff to include him in conversations, but Emily noticed that he observed her too, quick glances that he diverted when he realized he was being noticed. After dinner, Emily went to do her night round. It was her favorite time of day when the house calmed down and she could have a few minutes of peace with her thoughts. She was checking the residence on the second floor when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Michael appeared at the entrance to the nursing station, wearing a dark sweatshirt and jeans. He seemed different without the white coat, younger and more vulnerable. "Sorry to disturb," he said. "I couldn't sleep and thought about checking on some patients." "No problem. I also have difficulty sleeping in new places." Michael approached the counter where Emily was organizing medications for the morning administration. "Actually, it's not the new place. I've had insomnia for a long time." "Since when?" "Since some things in my life went out of control." Emily stopped organizing the medications and faced him. "Do you want to talk about it?" Michael laughed without humor. No, and you? Do you want to talk about why a qualified nurse like you is hiding in a nursing home in the middle of nowhere? Hiding? Sorry, that was a poor choice of words. It wasn't. You got it right. Emily sighed and leaned on the counter. Sometimes running away is the only option we have. And what are you running from? The question hung in the air between them. Emily felt the impulse to tell everything, to share the weight she had carried for so long. There was something about Michael that made her feel he would understand, that he wouldn't judge. But the habit of self-preservation was stronger. From ghosts, she finally said. Michael nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. I understand. I'm also running from mine. They worked side by side for the next 40 minutes, checking patients, adjusting medications, talking about clinical cases in low voices so as not to wake anyone. Emily discovered that Michael had a gentle approach with the elderly, always explaining what he was doing, always asking permission before touching them. You have a way with them, commented Emily when they left Mrs. Antonia's room. Elderly. People deserve respect. They've lived longer than all of us, survived things we can't imagine. The least I can do is treat them with dignity. Not every doctor thinks like that. No. But perhaps it's because I know what it's like to be vulnerable in the hands of others. There was a deep pain in these words, and Emily felt an unexpected connection with him. Did that happen to you? Michael stopped in the middle of the corridor and faced her. It did, and to you too, right? The question was asked with such gentleness that Emily almost answered, almost told about Alexander, about the 15-year-old girl who had her trust shattered, about the years of therapy and self-blame that followed. Almost, but she couldn't. Maybe, was all she managed to say. Michael nodded and didn't press. If you ever want to talk, I understand ghosts, and I don't judge. They finished the round in comfortable silence. When they said goodbye in the entrance hall, Emily felt a strange sensation, as if something important had happened between them, even if she couldn't define exactly what. Back in her room, Emily opened the blue notebook and wrote, Michael arrived today. There's something about him that makes me uneasy, but it's not fear. It's something else. It's as if he can see through me, but without making me feel exposed. And there's something about him and Alexander. His reaction when he saw the Sir, Michael also has secrets. During the rest of the week, Emily and Michael developed an unplanned routine. He always appeared at the nursing station during the night rounds, offering help with the more complex patients. They talked little, but there was a silent understanding between them, as if they recognized something familiar in each other. Michael proved to be an exceptional doctor. He identified problems that had gone unnoticed, suggested treatments that significantly improved the quality of life of several residents, and established a routine of care that left the entire team impressed. But Emily also noticed other things. He never received phone calls. He never mentioned friends or family. When Mrs. Harrison asked about his documents for professional registration, he said he was waiting for some papers from Washington, but seemed evasive about the details. And there were moments when Emily caught him looking out the window with an expression of someone who was expecting something, or someone, that never arrived. On the Friday of his first week, Michael did something that surprised everyone. During lunch, he announced that he would like to implement a new routine of palliative care for the most debilitated patients. Many of our residents are in the terminal phase, he explained. We can do more to ensure that their last moments are dignified and without unnecessary pain. Mrs. Harrison seemed interested. What do you propose? Complete revision of pain protocols, implementation of complementary therapies, and perhaps creating a more welcoming environment for families. I know not everyone has regular visits, but for those who do, we can make the process less traumatic. Would that include the patient in the basement? Asked Marlene. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second. It would include all patients. That afternoon, Emily found Michael in the back garden of the house, sitting on a bench under an old maple tree. He was reading a book, but Emily noticed that its pages hadn't changed in the 15 minutes she had been observing him from the nursing station window. "May I sit?" she asked, approaching. Michael raised his eyes and nodded. "Of course." Emily sat at the other end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "How you seem worried about something?" "I always seem worried. It's my resting face." Emily laughed, and it was the first time Michael had heard her laugh genuinely. The sound was musical, genuine, and it made something move inside his chest. "You have a beautiful laugh," he said without thinking. Emily blushed and looked away. "Thank you." They remained in silence for a few minutes, watching the leaves fall from the tree. It was a golden late afternoon, with the sun setting behind the hills and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Michael," Emily said finally, "can I ask you a question?" "You can." "Why did you really come here?" Michael closed the book and placed it on the bench between them. "Because I need time to think, to decide some important things in my life." "What kind of things?" Michael faced her, and Emily saw an internal struggle in his eyes. "The kind of things that can destroy everything you believed about yourself." The brutal honesty of the answer left Emily speechless. She recognized in those words the same kind of pain she carried within herself. "And you?" asked Michael. "Why are you really here?" Emily breathed deeply. "Because some truths are too heavy to carry alone, but also too dangerous to share with just anyone." Michael nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you really?" "I do. And I also understand that sometimes we need to find the right person to share those truths with." They looked at each other in silence, and Emily felt something move inside her, something that had been dormant for a long time. It was as if Michael could see through all the layers of protection she had built around herself, but instead of feeling vulnerable, she felt seen, perhaps for the first time in years. "Michael," she said softly, "do you know Alexander Sullivan?" The question completely changed the atmosphere between them. Michael became rigid, and Emily saw something like fear pass through his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Because when you saw his name, you reacted like someone who had already heard of him." Michael stood up abruptly. "I need to go. I have to review some charts." He walked away quickly, leaving Emily alone on the bench with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Michael knew Alexander Sullivan, and whatever the connection between them, it was something Michael wasn't ready to share. That night, Emily did her round alone. Michael didn't appear at the nursing station, and when she passed through the corridor that led to the staff annex, she saw that the light in his apartment was on, but the curtains were closed. She was about to return to her room when she heard a noise coming from the basement. Footsteps. Someone was down there. Emily descended the stairs slowly, trying not to make noise. When she reached the corridor, she saw a silhouette at the door of Alexander's room. It was Michael. He was standing at the threshold, looking at the man in the bed, but he didn't enter the room. Emily could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigidity of his posture. He stood there for several minutes, just observing, as if he were waging an internal battle. Finally, Michael turned and began to walk back down the corridor. Emily hid behind a column, waiting for him to pass. When Michael climbed the stairs, she heard something that made her freeze. He was crying. Emily stayed in the dark corridor for a few more minutes, trying to process what she had seen. Michael knew Alexander Sullivan, knew him well enough to cry upon seeing him. But what did this mean? Who was Michael Carter, really? And what kind of past did he share with the man who had destroyed her childhood? The questions echoed in her mind as she returned to her room, knowing that sleep would not come easily that night. Mist Haven Home was proving to be a much more complex place than she had imagined, and Michael Carter was a piece of a puzzle that she was only beginning to put together. The following days passed in a silent dance of approach and retreat between Emily and Michael. He resumed appearing during the night rounds, but there was a new tension in the air, as if both knew they were walking on the edge of a precipice without knowing exactly what lay below. Emily began to observe him more closely during the day. She noticed how Michael lingered examining certain patients, especially those who mentioned coming from small towns in the Virginia countryside. She noticed how he asked specific questions about their past, about priests they had known, about churches they had attended. And she noticed mainly how he avoided any mention of Alexander Sullivan. On Tuesday, Emily was in the garden picking mint for Mrs. Constance's tea when Michael approached. He carried a folder and seemed hesitant, as if he had made a difficult decision. "Emily, can I talk to you?" She raised her eyes, shielding them from the afternoon sun with her hand. "Sure. Did something happen?" Michael looked around, checking if they were alone. "Not here. Can you meet me in the library after dinner?" There was an urgency in his voice that made Emily's heart race. "Is everything all right?" "It is. It's just, there are some things I need to tell you." The rest of the day passed with torturous slowness for Emily. She caught herself making small mistakes, distracted, thinking about what Michael might want to say. During dinner, she observed him discreetly. He barely touched his food and left before dessert, taking the folder with him. The library at Mist Haven Home was on the first floor, a cozy environment with dark wooden shelves that went from floor to ceiling, worn leather armchairs and a large table in the center. Emily arrived a few minutes after 8 in the evening and found Michael sitting in one of the armchairs, with the folder open on his lap and several photographs spread out on the low table in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he said when she entered. Emily approached slowly, trying to see what was in the photographs. "Michael, what is this?" "My past, or at least part of it." He gestured to the armchair across from his. "Please sit down." Emily settled into the armchair, but her eyes couldn't look away from the images spread out on the table. They were old. Photographs, some in black and white, others colored but faded by time. People in period clothing, children playing, religious ceremonies. "I grew up in an orphanage," Michael began, his voice low but firm. "It wasn't an easy childhood. My mother died in childbirth, and my father couldn't handle the responsibility of raising a child alone." Emily remained silent, feeling that any word could break the spell that allowed Michael to talk about it. The orphanage was in a small town near Winchester. It was run by nuns, but there was a priest who visited regularly, who was involved with the activities, who helped find families for adoption. Michael picked up one of the photographs and handed it to Emily. Alexander Sullivan. The photograph showed a young man, about 30, in a cassock, surrounded by smiling children. It was clearly Alexander, but decades younger, with a face full of life and bright eyes. One of the children, a dark-haired boy, was at his side, looking at him with evident adoration. "This boy is you," said Emily, recognizing Michael's eyes in the child in the photo. "Yes, I was 8 years old when this photo was taken." Michael took the image back and observed it with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. "Alexander was the first father figure I had. He taught me to read, helped me with my studies, encouraged me to dream of a better future. When I turned 16, he helped me get a scholarship to finish high school in Springfield." Emily felt something move in her stomach. "He was important to you." "He was everything to me. For years, he was the only person who believed I could be something in life." Michael picked up another photograph, this one showing his high school graduation with Alexander at his side, proud. "When I entered medical school, he was there. When I graduated, he was there. It was like having a real father." "And what happened?" asked Emily, although part of her already suspected the answer. Michael was silent for a long moment, looking at his hands. "I discovered who he really was." The statement hung in the air between them. Emily felt her breathing become shallow, as if the oxygen had become rarer in the room. "When?" 3 years ago. I was working at Springfield Memorial when a patient was admitted. A young woman, in her 20s, who had attempted suicide." Michael raised his eyes and met Emily's. During psychiatric treatment, she began to talk about childhood traumas, sexual abuse committed by a religious authority figure. When she mentioned his name, I thought it was a coincidence. Alexander isn't a rare name. Emily felt her hands grow cold, but it wasn't a coincidence. No, She described specific details, birthmarks, habits, physical characteristics that only someone who knew Alexander intimately could know. And then other women started to appear. 2, 3, 5, all with similar stories, all from towns where Alexander had worked over the years. Michael stood up and began to pace around the library, as if he couldn't stay still. I refused to believe it at first. I thought it was some kind of conspiracy, that someone was trying to destroy the reputation of a good man. But the evidence was too consistent, too detailed. And you confronted him? I tried. But when I looked for Alexander, I discovered he had disappeared. He left the parish where he worked without warning, without explanations. It was as if he had evaporated. Michael stopped in front of the window, observing the mist that was beginning to rise from the valleys. I spent months investigating discreetly. I discovered there was a pattern. Alexander would stay a few years in a town, establish himself as a respected figure in the community, and then inevitably rumors would arise, accusations that were hushed up by the church hierarchy. He would be transferred to another place, and the cycle would begin again. Emily stood up as well, feeling a need to move, and the victims? Silenced, discredited. Some were sent to convents, others to psychiatric institutions. Some simply disappeared from public life. Michael turned to face her. That's when I understood why you're here. The comment hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. What do you mean? Your name was on a list I found. Emily Wilson, 15 years old at the time, from a small town near Clermont. Complaint made against Father Alexander Sullivan, archived without investigation for lack of evidence. After that, you spent 2 years in a convent in Winchester, before managing to leave and finish your studies. Emily felt her legs grow weak and leaned on the table. You knew who I was from the first day. I did, and I came here because of you. The confession fell like a bomb between them. Emily looked at Michael with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and confusion. Because of me? Why? Michael approached her slowly, as if he were dealing with a wounded animal. Because when I discovered that Alexander was here at Misthaven Home, hospitalized in a vegetative state, I needed to understand what had happened. And when I saw your name on the list of new staff, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. You thought I was here to get revenge on him. I didn't know what to think. I just knew that 2 people with a history with Alexander Sullivan were in the same place at the same time. That doesn't happen by chance. Emily moved away from him, needing space to breathe, to think. So all of this was a lie. Your kindness, our connection? No. The answer came quick and fierce. Nothing I felt for you was a lie. I came here with suspicions, but what happened between us, that was real. Emily laughed without humor. How can I believe that? You lied about who you were, about why you were here. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the whole truth. Michael took a step toward her. Emily, I understand your anger, but you need to listen to me. I didn't come here to judge you or confront you. I came because I need answers. Alexander Sullivan was the most important person in my childhood, and discovering he was a monster destroyed everything I believed about myself. And what does that have to do with me? Because you survived him. Because you found a way to rebuild your life, to become someone who cares for others, who does good in the world. I need to understand how you did that. The vulnerability in Michael's voice disarmed part of Emily's anger. She could see the genuine pain in his eyes, the conflict between the man who had loved a father figure and the man who had discovered that same figure had hurt other people. Michael, you're not responsible for what he did. But I'm responsible for having been blind to who he really was. For years I defended his memory, spoke of him as a saint. How many people did I hurt doing that? How many victims felt that nobody would believe them because people like me painted Alexander as a perfect man? Emily then understood the true torture Michael was living through. It wasn't just the discovery that his mentor had been an abuser. It was the guilt of having been, unconsciously, complicit in the silencing of the victims. Michael, look at me. She waited until he raised his eyes. You were a child, an abandoned, Child who found in Alexander the only source of love and stability you knew. You couldn't have known. But I should have suspected. I should have seen the signs. What signs? Abusers are masters of manipulation. They know exactly how to present themselves to each person. For you, he was the savior. For girls like me, he was... Emily stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Michael came closer. Emily, can you tell me what happened? I need to understand. Emily was silent for a long moment, waging an internal battle. She had kept that secret for so long that talking about it seemed almost impossible. But there was something in Michael's eyes, a desperate sincerity, that made her want to try. I was 15, she began, her voice almost a whisper. I was preparing for confirmation. Alexander had been the priest of our parish for 2 years, was loved by all. My mother died when I was 12, and my father drank a lot. Alexander offered to give me private catechism lessons, said he wanted to make sure I was spiritually prepared. Michael sat on the edge of the table, giving her space, but remaining close enough to hear. The lessons were in the sacristy, after the afternoon mass. At first he really talked about religion, about faith, about how God loved me especially because I was motherless. He said I was special, chosen. Emily closed her eyes as if she could see the dark sacristy, full of candles and images of saints. After a few weeks he began to say that I was tense, that I needed to relax to receive the word of God. It started with massages on the shoulders. Michael closed his fists but remained silent. Gradually the touches became more intimate. He said it was normal, that God approved, that it was a special form of prayer. I was just a girl, Michael. I didn't know what was normal or not. Emily opened her eyes and met his. The last time he went further, and when I tried to resist, he said God would be disappointed in me, that I would be responsible for destroying the faith of the entire community if I told anyone. Michael had tears in his eyes, but his voice came out firm. And you told? I tried. I told my father the next day. He slapped me in the face and said I was making up stories to get attention. That Alexander was a holy man, and I was a perverted girl. He forbade me from talking about it again. And the community. When my father told some people what I had made up, they were scandalized with me, not with Alexander. They said I was possessed, that the devil was using an unprotected orphan to try to destroy a servant of God. Emily laughed bitterly. A few months later, my father sent me to the convent in Winchester for me to find my way back to God. Michael stood up and began to pace again, clearly fighting against anger. How long did you stay there? 2 years. 2 years being treated as if I were a sinner seeking redemption. The nuns weren't cruel, but they weren't affectionate either. I was the girl who had tried to destroy a priest, remember? I needed constant, spiritual supervision. How did you get out? When I turned 18, I was technically free to leave, but I had no money, no place to live, hadn't finished high school. One of the younger nuns, Sister Teresa, helped me. She got a scholarship for me to finish high school in Springfield, at a technical school that offered a dormitory. Michael stopped in front of her. And you became a nurse. I became a nurse. I studied obsessively, as if education could protect me from being vulnerable again. I never wanted to depend on anyone to survive again. They were silent for a few minutes, the weight of the revelations hanging between them. Emily felt strangely relieved for having told her story, but also vulnerable, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Emily, Michael finally said, "May I ask you something?" "You may." "Why did you come to work here knowing Alexander was interned?" Emily sighed. "I didn't know when I accepted the job. I only found out on the first day when Mrs. Harrison showed me the basement." She looked at the photographs spread out on the table. "When I saw his name on the chart, my first impulse was to run, but then I thought maybe it was fate. Maybe I needed to face my past to move forward." "And how do you feel now, knowing he's here?" Emily thought about the question for a moment, confused. On one hand, there's a dark part of me that feels satisfied seeing him so vulnerable, so dependent on care. But on the other hand, he's just an old and sick man. He's no longer the monster of my childhood. Michael understood then the true torture Emily was living through. It wasn't just the discovery of seeing her abuser again. It was the conflict between the desire for revenge and the compassion that came from her profession. Emily, there's one more thing I need to tell you. What? Alexander is not in a vegetative state because of age or natural disease. Someone tried to kill him. The words hit Emily like lightning. What do you mean? Michael picked up a folder that was on the floor and removed some documents. I gained access to his medical record from before he arrived here. 3 years ago, Alexander was found unconscious in his cell in a monastery in Georgia. There were signs of poisoning by medications. He almost died. Someone tried to kill him? They tried, and almost succeeded, which makes me think it might not have been the first attempt. Michael showed the documents to Emily. Look at the dates. The poisoning attempt happened exactly 1 week after the first public accusation against him was published in a Washington newspaper. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. You think some of the victims tried to get revenge? Or someone close to one of the victims? Or someone from the church itself who wanted to silence him permanently? Michael put away the documents. What worries me is that whoever tried to kill him might know he's here. And why would that be a problem? He's practically dead already. Michael faced her with a seriousness that made her freeze. Because if someone discovers that there are 2 of Alexander's victims working in the same institution where he is interned, they might think we're conspiring to finish what they started. The implication of Michael's words fell on Emily like an avalanche. You think we're in danger? I think we need to be very careful, and I think we need to find out who really brought Alexander here, and why. Emily sat heavily in one of the armchairs, trying to process everything she had discovered. In a few hours, her reality had completely transformed. Michael wasn't just a doctor fleeing from his past. He was connected to her trauma in ways she could never have imagined. And Alexander Sullivan, the man who had haunted her nightmares for years, was at the center of a mystery that could put both of them in danger. Michael, she finally said, what do we do now? He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. First, we need to find out who is behind Alexander's internment here. Second, we need to be extremely discreet about our connection to him. And third, he hesitated. And third? Michael raised his eyes and met hers. Third, we need to decide if we can trust each other completely. Emily looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth and firmness of Michael's touch. It was the first time in years she had allowed a man to touch her without flinching, without feeling fear. There was something about Michael that calmed her, that made her feel safe, even amid all that uncertainty. I trust you, she said softly. Michael smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. And I trust you. They stayed like that for a few moments, hands joined, looking at each other in the soft light of the library. Emily felt something move inside her, something that had been dormant for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. It was attraction. Yes, but it was more than that. It was recognition. It was the sensation of finding someone who understood her pain without judgment, someone who carried similar scars. Emily, said Michael, his voice hoarse, may I kiss you? The question was asked with such gentleness, with such respect, that Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. No one had ever asked permission before. No one had ever treated her will as something that mattered. Yes, she whispered. Michael leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to retreat if she wanted to. But Emily didn't retreat. When his lips touched hers, it was with a reverence that surprised her. The kiss was soft, almost chaste, like a prayer, made skin against skin. When they separated, Emily was crying, not from sadness but from relief. It was the first time someone had kissed her without taking, without demanding, without hurting. Is everything all right? Asked Michael, concerned. Everything's all right, said Emily, smiling through the tears. It's the first time someone has kissed me without hurting me. Michael passed his thumb gently over the tears on her face. No one will ever hurt you again, not while I'm around. It was a big promise, perhaps impossible to fulfill, but in the silence of the library, with the mist enveloping Mist Haven, home like a protective embrace, Emily chose to believe it. They separated reluctantly when the library clock struck 10. There were practical things to resolve, questions to ask, mysteries to unravel. But that night, for the first time in years, Emily slept without nightmares. And in the apartment on the upper floor, Michael stayed awake until dawn, reviewing all the documents he had collected about Alexander Sullivan, determined to protect the woman he was falling in love with, even if it meant facing the demons of his own past. The days following the revelations in the library were marked by a new and cautious intimacy between Emily and Michael. They didn't speak openly about the kiss, but there was a subtle change in the way they moved around each other, as if an invisible barrier had been removed. Emily caught herself observing Michael's hands when he examined the patients, remembering the gentleness with which he had touched her face. Michael, in turn, found excuses to pass by the nursing station during the day, always with some medical question that justified his presence. It was during one of these casual visits that Emily noticed something strange. Michael was reviewing Mrs. Mercedes's chart when she saw that he had stopped on a specific page, frowning. "Did something happen?" she asked, approaching. Michael pointed to a notation in the corner of the page. "Have you seen this before?" Emily looked at where he indicated. It was a small mark, almost imperceptible, made in pencil in the upper right corner of the sheet. It seemed random, but when Emily paid attention, she realized there was a pattern, a small cross followed by 3 dots. "I never noticed." "What do you think it means?" Michael quickly leafed through other charts and found similar marks in 3 more of them, always the same sequence, cross and 3 dots. "Emily, can you check if there are these marks in the charts of the other patients?" Discreetly. "Of course, but why is this important?" "Because all the marked files are of patients who arrived here in the last 2 years, and all of them are funded by the same religious organization that pays for Alexander's treatment." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "You think there's some connection?" "I don't know yet, but I want to find out." That afternoon, Emily took advantage of a moment when Mrs. Harrison had gone out for a meeting in town to discreetly review all the charts in the file. Of the 52 resident files, 7 contained the mysterious marks. In addition, she noticed something Michael hadn't perceived. All the marked patients had arrived at the home through the same contact. A man named Father Richard Miller, representative of the St. Francis of Assisi congregation. When Michael returned from his afternoon round, Emily found him in the garden and reported her discoveries in a low voice. "Father Richard Miller," repeated Michael. "I've never heard that name before." "Neither have I, but he seems to be the one who authorizes the internments funded by the congregation." Emily looked around to make sure they were alone. "Michael, there's one more thing. All 7 marked patients are in the basement or in isolated rooms." Michael stopped walking. "All of them?" "All of them. It's as if they were being kept separate from the other residents." "Or hidden," murmured Michael. They decided to investigate further. During the night round, Emily took Michael to see the marked patients. The first was Mr. Benedict, an 80-year-old man who had been in a coma for 6 months. The second, Mrs. Aparecida, had advanced Alzheimer's and spent her days in an almost vegetative state. The third, Mr. Fernando, had suffered a stroke and lost the ability to speak. "All of them are in states that prevent them from communicating," observed Michael after examining the last patient. "Is it coincidence?" "I don't believe in so many coincidences," responded Emily. It was then that they heard footsteps in the corridor above. Someone was walking on the first floor, which was strange at that hour of the night. Emily and Michael looked at each other and silently climbed the stairs from the basement. The corridor of the first floor was in semi-darkness, illuminated only by emergency lights. Emily was about to suggest that it was just one of the residents walking during an episode of insomnia when she saw a shadow moving near Mrs. Harrison's office. Michael gently held her by the arm, indicating that they should remain hidden. positioned themselves behind a column, and observed a hooded figure tampering with the lock on the office door. The person wore dark clothes and moved carefully, clearly trying not to make noise. After a few minutes, the lock yielded and the figure entered the office. A faint light came on inside, probably from a small flashlight. "Should we call the police?" whispered Emily. Michael shook his head. "Let's see what he's looking for first." They waited almost 20 minutes before the figure left the office. It was impossible to see the face under the hood, but by the stature and movements, it seemed to be a middle-aged man. He carefully locked the door and headed for the stairs that led to the ground floor. Michael and Emily waited a few more minutes before venturing to the office. Michael managed to open the lock with a hairpin that Emily kept in her hair, a skill he vaguely explained as something he had learned in a difficult youth. The office seemed unchanged at first glance, but when they examined it more closely, they realized that some files had been disturbed. Drawers that Emily knew were organized in a specific way now had papers out of order. "What could he have been looking for?" murmured Emily, carefully leafing through the documents. Michael was examining Mrs. Harrison's computer when he noticed something. "Emily, look at this." On the screen, there was an email message that wasn't there during the day. The sender was ourmillerestfranciscongregation.org, and the subject simply said, "Urgent transfer." "Did he hack the computer?" asked Emily. "Or he knew the password?" Michael clicked to open the email. The message was brief. "Situation compromised. Arrange immediate transfer of patient A. Sullivan. Await instructions for other patients." Emily felt her blood freeze. "They want to transfer Alexander." "It seems so, and apparently there are other patients at risk too." Michael quickly copied the email to a flash drive he always carried and deleted the browsing history. They left the office as silently as they had entered, but both knew that things had changed drastically. Back in Emily's room, they sat on the small bed and tried to process what they had discovered. "Michael, what do you think is really happening here?" Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that Emily was learning to recognize as a sign of stress. "I think Mist Haven Home isn't just a nursing home. I think it's a place where certain people are kept in permanent silence." "You mean?" "I mean that all those marked patients probably have some connection to church scandals. Alexander isn't the only abuser being hidden here." The implication was terrible. Emily imagined how many victims might be being silenced, how many crimes were being covered up through that elaborate system of palliative care. "We need to do something," she said. "We do, but we also need to be very careful. If we're right, we're dealing with very powerful people who have a lot to lose." Michael stood up and began to pace around the small room. "Emily, I need to ask you a difficult question. You can ask. Would you be willing to take risks to expose this? Because if we decide to act, our lives will change forever. There's no going back." Emily thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about all the other girls who might have gone through what she went through. She thought about how many truths were being buried in that seemingly peaceful place. "I'm willing," she finally said, "but not alone." Michael smiled for the first time in hours. "You won't be alone, I promise." He approached the bed where she was sitting and extended his hand. "Emily, would you trust me enough to leave here with me?" "Leave?" "If things get dangerous, if we need to flee, would you come with me?" Emily looked at the extended hand. It was a question that went far beyond professional partnership or friendship. It was a question about future, about commitment, about love. "Yes," she said, taking his hand. "I would go." Michael gently pulled her up, and suddenly they were very close, breathing the same air. The tension that had been building between them for days finally found its release. "Emily," whispered Michael, "may I touch you?" The question, asked with the same reverence as the first time, made Emily's heart race. "Yes." Michael's hands positioned themselves delicately on her face, his thumbs caressing her cheeks. "Are you sure?" In response, Emily leaned forward and kissed him. This time the kiss was less hesitant, deeper. Michael wrapped her in his arms, and Emily allowed herself to melt against his chest, feeling for the first time in her adult life what it was to be desired without being objectified. When they separated, both were breathing with difficulty. "Emily," said Michael, his voice hoarse, "I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of the situation, or that this has anything to do with what we're discovering about Alexander." "I know," she responded, resting her head on his shoulder. "This has nothing to do with the past. It has to do with the present, with us." They stayed embraced for a long time, finding comfort in each other's presence amid all the uncertainty. Eventually, Michael forced himself to move away. "I should go if someone discovers I'm here at this hour." "I know." Emily didn't want him to go, but she understood the need for caution. "Tomorrow we'll start investigating more deeply," said Michael at the door. "And Emily?" "Yes?" "After we resolve all of this, I'd like to take you to dinner. A real date, away from all this madness." Emily smiled. "I'd like that." After Michael left, Emily lay on the bed trying to sleep, but her mind was racing too much. She thought about the kiss, about the sensation of being in his arms, but she also thought about the email they had discovered, about the implications of what they were unearthing. The next morning, Emily woke to insistent knocking on the door. It was Marlene, and she seemed agitated. "Emily, you need to come. Something happened with Dr. Michael." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What happened?" "Mrs. Harrison wants to speak with him urgently. She seems very angry." Emily dressed quickly and followed Marlene to the administrative office. Michael was sitting in front of Mrs. Harrison's desk, who was holding some papers in her hand and had a severe expression on her face. "Emily, good that you arrived," said Mrs. Harrison when she entered. "I need to speak with both of you." Emily sat next to Michael, trying to read his expression. He seemed calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I received some concerning information this morning," continued Mrs. Harrison. "It seems that you two are asking questions about things that are none of your business." "I don't understand," said Emily, trying to sound genuinely confused. Mrs. Harrison looked directly at her. "Someone informed me that you were reviewing charts without authorization, asking questions about the financing of certain patients." Michael leaned forward. "Mrs. Harrison, as the responsible physician, I have the right to review all the charts of the patients under my care." "You do, yes, but you don't have the right to question the funding sources or investigate the administration of this institution." There was something in Mrs. Harrison's voice that Emily had never heard before. A hardness, an authority that suggested she was receiving pressure from somewhere. "Who said we were doing that?" asked Emily. Mrs. Harrison hesitated for a moment. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you two need to focus on your professional responsibilities and stop asking unnecessary questions." "And if we don't stop?" asked Michael calmly. The question caught Mrs. Harrison off guard. "What?" "I'm asking what the consequences will be if we continue doing our work in the way we think appropriate." Mrs. Harrison looked at the papers in her hands again. Emily noticed that they trembled slightly. "Michael, you are an excellent doctor, and Emily, you are a dedicated nurse. It would be a shame if I had to dismiss you for inappropriate behavior." The threat was clear. Emily felt anger rise in her chest, but Michael discreetly placed his hand on her arm, a signal for her to keep calm. "We understand perfectly," said Michael. "May we go?" Mrs. Harrison nodded, but when they rose to leave, she called Emily back. "Emily, may I speak with you in private for a moment?" Michael hesitated at the door, but Emily gestured for him to go. When they were alone, Mrs. Harrison sighed deeply. "Emily, I like you very much. You are an exemplary employee and a good person. Thank you. That's why I'm going to give you some advice. Don't get involved with things you don't understand. There are forces at play here that are greater than you imagine." Emily felt a chill. "What kind of forces?" Mrs. Harrison looked at the door, as if to make sure no one was listening. "The kind of forces that can destroy lives. The kind that have already destroyed other lives in the past." "Mrs. Harrison, do you know something about the patients in the basement?" The director closed her eyes for a moment. "I know that some secrets are kept buried for good reasons, and I know that people who try to unearth them sometimes get hurt. Is that a threat?" It's a warning from someone who cares about you. Emily left the office with more questions than answers. She found Michael waiting in the corridor, clearly anxious. What did she say? Emily quickly recounted the conversation. Michael was thoughtful for a moment. Emily, I think we need to accelerate our investigation. If they're threatening us, it means we're on the right track, but it also means we're running out of time. What do you propose? Tonight, we'll enter Mrs. Harrison's office again. But this time we'll look for the physical files, not just the computer. And we'll find out who Father Richard Miller really is. The rest of the day passed in almost unbearable tension. Emily tried to maintain her normal routine, but she noticed she was being observed more closely than usual. Marlene asked several casual questions about her relationship with Michael. Sonia commented that she had noticed Emily had been different lately. Even some of the residents seemed to be paying more attention to her activities. During dinner, Michael sat at the table with the other staff as always, but didn't make eye contact with Emily. They had agreed to act as if nothing had happened, as if the conversation with Mrs. Harrison had scared them enough to give up their investigations. At midnight, Emily silently left her room and met Michael at the end of the corridor. They descended to the ground floor using a secondary staircase that led to the back of the house, avoiding the busier areas. Mrs. Harrison's office was dark, but this time Michael brought a small flashlight with red light that wouldn't attract attention from afar. They headed first to the physical files, large metal drawers that contained older documents. "Look for anything related to the St. Francis of Assisi congregation," whispered Michael. Emily found an entire folder dedicated to correspondence with the congregation. The oldest letters dated from 3 years ago, and all were signed by Father Richard Miller. But when she reached the most recent letters, she found something that made her freeze. "Michael, look at this." She showed him a letter dated just 2 weeks ago. The signature was from Father Richard Miller, but the handwriting was completely different from the old letters. "Two different people," murmured Michael. Or Father Richard Miller no longer exists," completed Emily. Michael continued searching while Emily photographed the documents with her cell phone. It was then that he found a folder marked Special Cases Confidential. Inside the folder were detailed files of the 7 marked patients, including Alexander, but they weren't ordinary medical files. They were complete dossiers, including criminal histories, lists of victims, evidence of abuse, and something that made Emily's blood freeze: photographs. "My God," she whispered upon seeing a photo of herself at 15, clearly taken without her knowledge. Michael found his own photo also from adolescence, and photos of dozens of other people, men, women, children, all connected in some way to the patients being kept at Mist Haven Home. "They're cataloguing the victims," said Michael, his voice filled with horror and anger. Emily leafed through more documents and found something even worse: contracts. Silent contracts signed by families of victims in exchange for financial compensation. Agreements to keep certain people in special care to prevent them from speaking. And at the bottom of the folder, a list of names under the title Problems to Resolve. Emily's name was on the list. Michael's name was too. "We need to get out of here," said Michael urgently. "Now." They quickly copied everything they could and put the documents back in place. But when they were leaving the office, they heard footsteps in the corridor above. This time it wasn't just one person, it was several. Michael turned off the flashlight and they hid behind Mrs. Harrison's desk, listening to the voices approaching. "Ah, you sure they were here?" It was a male voice that Emily didn't recognize. Yes, the tracking devices confirmed it. The second voice made Emily freeze. It was Mrs. Harrison. "And what do you want us to do?" "For now, just observe. If they try to leave the property or contact anyone from the outside, you know what to do." The voices moved away, but the implication of the words echoed in Emily's mind. Tracking devices. They were being monitored. Michael held her hand and whispered in her ear, "We have to flee tonight." Emily nodded, even knowing that leaving would be dangerous. Staying had become even more dangerous. They managed to return to their rooms without being seen, but both knew they had few hours before their absence was noticed. Michael quickly went to his apartment to get some essential belongings while Emily did the same. When they met again in the back garden, Michael carried only a small backpack and his car keys. "Where are we going?" asked Emily. "Away from here first, then we'll decide." They walked through the back of the property to where Michael had parked his car on a secondary road. The black sedan was hidden among some trees, invisible from the main house. When Michael started the engine, Emily looked for the last time at Misthaven Home. The windows were dark, and the morning mist was beginning to rise from the valleys, enveloping the building in an ethereal shroud. "Michael," she said as they drove away, "no matter what happens, I don't regret having met you." Michael took her hand as he drove. "Neither do I, and Emily." "Yes, this isn't the end, it's just the beginning." As the car disappeared into the darkness of the winding road, neither of them saw the figure watching from the window of the third floor of Misthaven Home, speaking softly into a cell phone, reporting that the problems had just resolved themselves. The road that descended from Misthaven Home was pitch dark, illuminated only by the headlights of the black sedan, cutting through the early hours. Michael drove in silence, constantly checking the rearview mirror, while Emily mentally organized everything they had discovered. The weight of the revelation seemed even heavier now that they were fleeing, now that it had become too real to ignore. "Where are we going?" asked Emily when they reached the main road. "I have a friend in Pinecrest, investigative journalist. If anyone can help us expose this, it's him." Michael accelerated slightly but kept within the speed limits. "The problem is getting there, without being followed." As if his words had invoked danger, Emily saw lights in the side mirror. "Michael, I think there's someone behind us." Michael looked in the rearview mirror, and his jaw tightened. "Two cars. They're keeping their distance but following us." "Are you sure?" "I am. I'll test it." He made an unexpected right turn, entering a secondary road. The headlights behind them hesitated for a moment, but then followed them. Emily felt her heart accelerate. What do we do now? Now I improvise. Michael knew these roads well. He had driven them during his investigations about Alexander, mentally mapping each curve, each shortcut. He suddenly accelerated, making the car jump over a bump, and sharply turned left onto a trail that was barely visible between the trees. "Hold tight," he murmured, cutting the headlights. They drove in the dark for a few terrifying minutes, with only the moonlight to guide them. Emily could hear the cars that were pursuing them passing on the main road, their confused voices echoing in the night. Finally, Michael stopped the car in a clearing hidden among pine trees. "We'll stay here until they give up," he said, turning off the engine. In the sudden silence, with only the sound of their accelerated breathing and crickets singing, the reality of the situation fell on them like an avalanche. They were alone in the middle of nowhere, fleeing from people who were clearly willing to do anything to keep their secrets buried. "Michael," said Emily, her voice trembling slightly, "what if we don't make it? What if they find us?" Michael turned to her in the car seat. Even in the darkness, she could see the determination in his eyes. "They won't find us, and even if they do, they won't silence us. We have too much evidence, and my friend already knows I'm investigating Alexander. Your friend knows about Misthaven Home? Not yet, but he will, and when he does, he'll make sure the story is told." Emily leaned closer to him. "Who is this?" "Friend?" "Thomas Reynolds. We've worked together for a few years since I started investigating the abuse cases. He's the journalist who published the first accusations against Alexander in the Washington newspaper." "The same journalist who almost caused his death?" Michael nodded grimly. "The same. Thomas feels responsible for what happened, even knowing it's not his fault. That's why he'll help us." They were silent for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the woods around them. Emily realized how physically close she was to Michael, in the confined space of the car, how she could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his skin mixed with the soap he used. "Michael," she said softly, "can I ask you a question?" "You can." "Are you afraid?" Michael took a while to answer. "I am, but not of dying. I'm afraid that the truth will die with us." I'm afraid that all these victims will never have justice. Emily extended her hand and touched his face delicately. And me? Are you afraid? For me? Michael's eyes closed at her touch. Very much. You didn't deserve to get involved in this. If something happens to you because of me... Stop, Emily interrupted, bringing her face even closer. I chose to get involved. I chose to trust you. I chose to stay by your side, Emily. And I choose that again now, even knowing the risks. Michael opened his eyes and faced her. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I found someone who makes me want to fight. Not just survive, but really fight for something. Her words seemed to break something inside Michael. He pulled her closer, and this time when they kissed, there was a different urgency, born not just of attraction, but of the awareness that they might not have much time. The kiss was deep, desperate, full of promises that both feared they might not be able to fulfill. When they separated, Michael pressed his forehead against hers. Emily, if we get out of this, I want to build a life with you, a life away from all this horror, where we can just be happy. When we get out of this, she corrected, because we will get out. Michael smiled for the first time since they had left the home. When we get out of this. They remained embraced until the sounds of the pursuit completely faded. When Michael judged it safe, he started the car again and they resumed the journey on secondary roads, avoiding the main ones. Dawn found them at a roadside diner, 2 hours from Pinecrest. It was a simple place, with formica tables and a counter, where an elderly man served strong coffee and sweet bread. There were only 2 other customers, truck drivers who talked quietly about loads and delivery deadlines. Emily and Michael sat at a table in the back, with their backs to the window, and ordered breakfast. Both were exhausted, but adrenaline was still running in their veins. I'll call Thomas soon, said Michael, checking his cell phone. But first, I need to tell you more about him. What do I need to know? Thomas isn't just a journalist. He's the son of one of Alexander's victims. Emily almost dropped her coffee cup. What? His mother was abused by Alexander in the 80s when she was a teenager. At the time, she tried to report it, but was sent to a convent. There, she discovered she was pregnant. Pregnant by Alexander? Michael nodded. Thomas grew up without knowing who his father was, only that he had been conceived in violence. His mother died when he was 20, but before dying, she told him the whole truth. That's why he dedicates himself to investigating abuse cases. Exactly. For him, each victim who gets justice is a way to honor his mother's memory. Emily felt a deep connection to Thomas's story. Does he know he might be Alexander's son? He knows, and he also knows that makes his investigations too personal for some editors. That's why he works as a freelancer now, publishing where his articles are accepted. And you trust him completely? Michael hesitated for just a moment. I do, but Emily, I need you to know that if we hand over this evidence to Thomas, there's no going back. Our safety will depend on how quickly he can publish the story and how much repercussion it has. I understand. Emily took a sip of coffee, thinking, Michael, can I ask you something about us? Of course. What happens afterward? I mean, regardless of how this ends, what happens between us? Michael took her hand over the table. What do you want to happen? I want to try. I want to see where this thing between us can lead. Emily blushed slightly. I know we've known each other for a short time and in strange circumstances, but you feel like we've known each other for much longer. Exactly. Michael smiled. I feel the same thing. It's as if you were the missing piece in a puzzle that I didn't even know I was putting together. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, watching the road through the window and mentally planning the next steps. When they were about to leave, Michael received a text message from an unknown number. We know where you are. Come back before it's too late. Emily read the message over his shoulder and felt her blood freeze. How did they get your number? Michael was already getting up, throwing money on the table. I don't know, but we need to get out of here now. They ran to the car, but when Michael tried to start the engine, nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing. Did they sabotage the car? Asked Emily, trying to stay calm. Michael got out and raised the hood. Several wires had been cut. I don't know how, but yes. What do we do now? Michael looked around. The diner was on a relatively busy road, but isolated enough that they were vulnerable. Let's ask for help. They went back to the diner where Michael explained to the owner that they had mechanical problems and needed a phone to call a tow truck. The man, a gentleman of about 60 with a kind face, offered help. I have a brother-in-law who's a mechanic. I can call him. Actually, said Michael, would it be possible to use your phone to make a long-distance call? It's urgent. Sure, son. Use it freely. Michael called Thomas Reynolds. Emily stood by his side, hearing only his side of the conversation, but perceiving by the change in Michael's expression that the news wasn't good. I see, said Michael after several minutes. Yes, we still have the evidence. Where can we meet you? After a few more minutes, he hung up. And? Asked Emily. Michael ran his hands through his hair. Thomas was already investigating Mist Haven Home. 2 weeks ago, he received an anonymous tip about patients being kept in forced silence. Tip from whom? He doesn't. No, but the person specifically mentioned Alexander Sullivan and the St. Francis of Assisi congregation. Emily felt a chill. Someone from the inside? Seems like it, and there's more. Thomas discovered that the congregation is a front. It exists only on paper. The money that finances Mist Haven Home comes from a fund administered by the church. Hierarchy itself. You mean this goes all the way to the top? It does, and that's why Thomas wants to meet us in person. He thinks it's not safe to transmit more information by phone. Where? There's an inn in Pinecrest in the historic center. Busy place with many exits. He'll be there at 2 in the afternoon. Emily looked at the clock. It was 10 in the morning. How are we going to get there without a car? Michael talked again with the diner owner, who offered to take them to Pinecrest in his delivery truck. I'm going there today anyway, to deliver some products. You can come with me. Michael and Emily looked at each other. Trusting a stranger was risky, but they didn't have many options. That would be a great help, said Michael. The man who introduced himself as Mr. Manuel loaded them and their few bags into the truck cabin. During the trip, he tried to make conversation, but Michael and Emily limited themselves to polite and vague answers. Mr. Manuel seemed to understand that something serious was happening and respected their silence. When they arrived in Pinecrest, Mr. Manuel left them in the central square, near the inn where they would meet Thomas. They thanked him profusely and walked through the stone streets of the historic city, trying to blend in with the tourists. The inn was a colonial mansion, converted, with small but charming rooms and a restaurant on the ground floor that served traditional local food. Michael reserved a room for them, registering with false names, and they went up to wait. The room was small, with a double bed, an old armchair, and a window overlooking the street. Emily sat on the bed while Michael checked the evidence they had collected, organizing photographs and documents. Michael, she said after a few minutes, can I ask you an intimate question? He raised his eyes from the papers. You can. How do you feel about Alexander now, after everything we've discovered? Michael stopped what he was doing and sat beside her on the bed. It's complicated. Part of me still holds affection for the man I knew in childhood. But that part is being suffocated by the anger at what he did to you and so many other people. And the guilt? The guilt is still there. It probably always will be. But I'm learning the difference between productive guilt and destructive guilt. Emily turned to face him completely. What's the difference? Destructive guilt paralyzes me, makes me feel that I'm complicit in his crimes. Productive guilt motivates me to act, to ensure he's held accountable and that other victims have a voice. And am I helping you with that? Michael smiled and touched her face delicately. You're helping me with everything, helping me understand that it's possible to carry the past without being crushed by it. Emily leaned into his touch. Michael, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. For years I blamed myself for what happened. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently, if I should have screamed, if I should have run. She paused for a moment, breathing deeply. But the worst was that a part of me felt that I had lost something precious, and would never be able to be intimate with someone without remembering. Michael listened to her in silence, giving her space to speak. But with you, it's different. When you touch me, when you kiss me, I feel like I'm recovering something I thought I had lost forever. What is it? The ability to be touched with love. Emily's words hit Michael like a revelation. He understood then that what was happening between them wasn't just attraction or companionship born from shared danger. It was mutual healing. "Emily," he said, his voice loaded with emotion, "you've given me a gift that you didn't even know you were giving." "What?" "You showed me that it's possible to transform pain into purpose, that it's possible to love someone not despite their traumas, but including them." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "Michael, I love you." The words came out without planning, and for a moment she was frightened by her own honesty. But when she saw the smile that spread across Michael's face, she knew she had done the right thing. "I love you too," he said, pulling her closer. "I love you in a way that I didn't know was possible." They kissed with a passion that was both urgent and reverent. Emily allowed herself to melt in Michael's arms, feeling that she was finally home. When they separated, both were breathing with difficulty. "Emily," said Michael, looking into her eyes, "I want you. I want to be with you completely, but only if you want it too, and only if you're sure." In response, Emily began to unbutton his shirt slowly. "I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure." What happened next was a mutual discovery, a careful and loving exploration that transformed the simple room of the inn into a sanctuary. Michael touched Emily as if she were made of precious porcelain, always checking if she was comfortable, always giving her control over the pace and intensity. For Emily, it was a revelation. She discovered that her body was capable of feeling pleasure without pain, that it was possible to give herself completely without feeling vulnerable in a negative way. In Michael's arms, she wasn't the victim of an old trauma. She was simply a woman loving and being loved. When they finally lay exhausted in each other's arms, Emily felt transformed. The weight she had carried for so many years hadn't completely disappeared, but it had become lighter, more manageable. "Michael," she whispered, her head on his chest. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me back to myself." Michael kissed the key, top of her head. "Thank you for showing me who I can be when I'm not carrying guilt." They fell asleep briefly, waking only to knocking at the door. It was Thomas Reynolds. Michael dressed quickly and went to answer, while Emily got ready in the bathroom. When she came out, she found Michael talking with a man of about 40, prematurely grey hair and intense eyes that painfully reminded her of Alexander's. "Emily, this is Thomas," said Michael. Said, "Thomas, Emily Wilson." Thomas stood up and extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily, and I'm sorry for what you went through." Emily was surprised by his frankness. "Michael told you?" "He did. And he also showed me the evidence you collected." Thomas gestured to the table where Michael had spread out the photographs and documents. "This is bigger than we imagined." "Bigger how?" asked Emily. Thomas pulled a chair and sat down, indicating for them to do the same. Misthaven Home isn't the only institution being used to silence victims. We found evidence of at least 6 other nursing homes, 3 convents and 2 sanatoriums involved in the scheme. Michael turned pale. "How many people are we talking about?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands. The scheme has been operating for decades." Emily felt nauseous. "And are they all funded by the church?" "By a complex network of organizations that eventually lead back to the ecclesiastical hierarchy. It's an elaborate system of money laundering and silencing." "What do we do now?" asked Michael. Thomas smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Now we destroy the entire system, but we'll need more evidence, and we'll need protection." "What kind of protection?" "I have contacts in the federal prosecutor's office and the FBI, people I trust who aren't involved with the church. If we deliver the evidence to them at the same time I publish the story, it will be harder for them to silence us. Emily felt a mixture of hope and fear. And if it doesn't work? Thomas faced her directly. Then at least we'll die trying to do the right thing. The brutal frankness of the answer made Emily understand that they were entering a war where normal rules didn't apply. But when she looked at Michael, she saw the same determination that she felt growing inside herself. "What do we need to do?" she asked. Thomas opened a folder he had brought with him. "First, you're going to tell me everything. Every detail, every observation, every suspicion. Then we'll organize the evidence in a way that's impossible to refute. And finally, we'll coordinate a simultaneous revelation that will shake the American Catholic Church to its foundations." Emily looked out the window of the room, observing tourists walking through the historic streets of Pinecrest, oblivious to the conspiracy that was being uncovered a few feet from them. In a few hours, she had gone from being a fugitive nurse to a whistleblower who could change the course of history. "When do we start?" she asked. "Now," replied Thomas, turning on a recorder. "Tell me everything about Alexander Sullivan." And Emily began to speak, not just about the trauma she had suffered, but about the strength she had found to survive it, not just about the past, but about the future she was building with Michael, not just about fear, but about the hope that no other girl would have to go through what she went through. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the sky, and inside the inn-room, 3 determined people planned how to bring down one of the most elaborate and cruel silencing systems the country had ever known. The interview with Thomas lasted 5 hours. When Emily finished telling her story, it was already dark night, and she felt simultaneously exhausted and relieved. It was the first time she had reported every detail of what had happened, without omitting anything, without softening the most painful parts. Thomas had recorded everything, but also took detailed notes, asking specific questions about dates, places, people who could serve as witnesses. Michael complemented with information about his own investigation and about the discoveries at Misthaven Home. "We have enough material to destroy the entire network," said Thomas, organizing the documents. "But we need to act quickly. If they discovered where you were this morning, it's a matter of time until they find us here too." "What's the plan?" asked Michael. Thomas consulted his watch. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I have a meeting scheduled with federal prosecutor Marcia Sanders. She's a specialist in crimes against sexual dignity and has a history of confronting powerful institutions. At 10 o'clock, I meet with FBI agent Richard Moore, and at 2 in the afternoon I publish the first article simultaneously in 3 different media outlets." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "And if they try to silence us before that?" "That's why you won't stay here tonight." Thomas took 2 keys from a keychain and handed them to Michael. "I have a country house 20 miles from here. Isolated place, but safe. You stay there until I give the signal that it's safe to return." "And you?" asked Michael. "I stay in the city. If something happens to me, the material is already with trusted people in New York and Washington. The story will be told anyway." Emily admired Thomas's courage, but also felt fear for him. "Thomas, are you sure you want to take this risk?" Thomas smiled, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. "Emily, my mother died carrying the shame of what Alexander did to her. She never had justice, never had peace. If I can ensure that other women have what she didn't have, all risks are worth it." They left the inn separately, Thomas first taking the original evidence in a folder. Michael and Emily 10 minutes later, carrying only their luggage and copies of the most important documents. Thomas's country house was on a dirt road, surrounded by pine forests and a small stream. It was a simple construction, with 2 bedrooms, a basic kitchen and a living room with a fireplace. More importantly, it had only one entrance and was positioned so that it was possible to see anyone approaching. Michael checked all the windows and doors while Emily explored the kitchen, finding basic supplies that Thomas had left for them. There was something domestic and comforting in those simple gestures, a normality that contrasted drastically with the chaos of their lives in recent weeks. "Michael," said Emily when he returned from the security inspection, "can I ask you a question about tomorrow?" "Of course." What happens afterward? I mean, after the story is published, after justice is done, what happens to us? Michael sat beside her on the small sofa in the living room. What do you want to happen? Emily took a while to respond, organizing her thoughts. I want us to build something together. I don't know exactly what yet, but I want it to be far from all this pain, far from these ghosts. I want that too. Michael took her hands. I was thinking that after everything calms down, we could go somewhere where nobody knows us. Start over. I can work as a doctor anywhere. You can work as a nurse. Or we could do something related to helping other victims, suggested Emily. Use our experience for something positive. Michael smiled. You think just like me. I was imagining maybe a support center, a place where people who have gone through similar traumas can find medical and psychological help. Really? Really. And who knows, in the future, when we're ready? Michael hesitated. What? Maybe we could have a family, raise children in an environment of love and security, the opposite of what we both had. Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. The idea of having children had always frightened her, for fear of not knowing how to protect them, how to raise happy children when she herself had grown up amid pain. But the idea of having children with Michael, of building a family based on true love and mutual healing, seemed not only possible but desirable. I would like that, she said softly. I would like that very much. They spent the night talking about the future, making plans that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Michael told about places where he had thought about living, small towns where they could start over in peace. Emily talked about the kind of work she would like to do, about how she wanted to help other women find strength to denounce their aggressors. When they finally went to sleep, they lay embraced in the small bed of the room, finding comfort in each other's physical presence. Emily fell asleep listening to Michael's heartbeats, a sound that had become her most comforting lullaby. They were awakened at 5 in the morning by knocking at the door. Michael got up immediately, gesturing for Emily to remain quiet. He approached the window and peered through the curtains. I can't see who it is, he whispered, but there are at least 2 cars. The knocking became more insistent, accompanied by an authoritative male voice. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands visible. Emily felt panic take over her body. What do we do? Michael quickly checked his cell phone. It was still too early for Thomas to have started the meetings with the authorities. They were alone. There's a window in the back of the bedroom that leads to the woods, said Michael quickly. We can try to get out that way. They quickly grabbed some clothes and the most important documents. Michael helped Emily out through the back window, and they ran for the protection of the trees just as they heard the front door being broken down. The forest was dense and dark, even with the faint light of dawn. They ran for a few minutes, hearing voices and dog barks behind them. Michael knew the region a bit from Thomas's explanations and guided them toward the stream. The water will mask our scent, he explained, as they entered the icy water. They walked in the stream for almost an hour, their feet numb with cold but determined to distance themselves from the pursuers. Finally, Michael led them out of the water, in an area where the forest was even thicker. We need to reach the main road, he said, checking the position of the sun to orient himself. From there, we can try to reach the city. But when they emerged from the forest 2 hours later, they found the road blocked by police cars. They weren't ordinary police, Emily realized. They were men in civilian clothes with an authority that seemed to come from places higher than local law enforcement. Michael, she whispered, I think we've been betrayed. Michael felt the same weight in his stomach. Someone had informed exactly where they would be. Someone who knew Thomas's plans. It was then that he heard the familiar voice. Michael, Emily, come out slowly with your hands visible. It was Mrs. Harrison. They emerged from the forest with their hands raised, finding themselves surrounded by 6 armed men and the director of Misthaven Home, who seemed very different from the maternal woman Emily had known. Now there was a hardness in her eyes, an authority that revealed her true role in that scheme. Mrs. Harrison, said Michael, trying to keep his voice calm, what's happening? What's happening is that you 2 got involved in matters that are none of your business. Mrs. Harrison approached, accompanied by a middle-aged man wearing a cassock. "Father Richard, these are the problems I mentioned." Emily felt a chill as she recognized the name. Father Richard Miller, the man who theoretically didn't exist, was right there in front of her. "Where are the documents?" asked Richard directly. "What? Documents?" Michael tried. Richard made a gesture and one of the men approached threateningly. "We don't have time for games. We know you were in Mrs. Harrison's office, we know you copied confidential files, and we know you were working with that journalist." "Were?" Emily caught the verb tense. "What did you do to Thomas?" Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in the gesture. "Mr. Reynolds had a car accident in the early hours. Very tragic. Apparently, he lost control on a curve." Emily felt nauseous. "So you killed him?" "We didn't do anything, but accidents happen when people meddle where they shouldn't." Michael took a step forward, instinctively protecting Emily. "What do you want?" "We want you two to disappear permanently, and we want all the documents you copied. And if we don't hand them over," Richard gestured to the armed men, "then you'll join Mr. Reynolds in an even greater tragedy." It was then that Emily heard something that made her freeze. Sirens. Many sirens rapidly approaching. Richard heard them too and frowned. "What is that?" One of the men spoke quickly into a radio, then approached Richard with a worried expression. "Sir, they're FBI cars. Many cars." "Impossible. How?" The answer came from a voice that made Emily smile for the first time in hours. It was Thomas, emerging from the forest on the other side of the road, accompanied by a woman in a suit who Emily imagined to be the federal prosecutor and several armed agents. "Because I wasn't in the car you blew." "Harp," shouted Thomas. "It was my assistant returning from the printing house where we printed 5,000 copies of the first article." Richard turned pale. "Impossible." "And because the meeting with the prosecutor was moved up to 5 in the morning, not 8. Thomas approached, protected by the federal agents. "And because everything you just said was recorded and broadcast live to 3 television stations." Emily looked around and noticed small cameras hidden in the trees, directional microphones pointed at them. Everything had been planned. "How?" asked Michael, incredulous. "Because I knew you would be betrayed," explained Thomas as the agents arrested Richard and his men. "I knew there was a mole among the people who had access to our plans." Emily looked at Mrs. Harrison, who was being handcuffed with an expression of resignation. "How did you find out?" "Because Mrs. Harrison contacted me 3 days ago, offering to provide information about Misthaven Home." Thomas smiled sadly. "She said she wanted to help, that she had remorse. But when we checked her background, we discovered she had been involved in the scheme from the beginning." "So this morning was a trap?" "It was, but a trap for them, not for you. You were the bait that allowed us to capture the real perpetrators." The prosecutor approached Emily and Michael. "I'm Marcia Sanders. I'm very sorry for what you went through, but I want you to know that today you helped expose one of the largest victim silencing schemes in the country's history." "What happens now?" asked Emily. "Now we'll dismantle the entire network. We already have search and seizure warrants for all the institutions involved, including Misthaven Home. And we're already locating all the victims who were silenced over the years." Michael embraced Emily, and she felt she could finally breathe freely for the first time in weeks. "And Alexander. Alexander Sullivan will be transferred to a public hospital where he'll receive the necessary medical care under judicial supervision," explained the prosecutor. "And if at any point he regains consciousness, he'll be prosecuted for all the crimes he committed." Thomas approached them. "Emily, Michael, I want you to know that your story will help hundreds of other victims find the courage to speak. We're already receiving reports from all over the country." Emily felt tears of relief running down her face, and the other people who were at the home. All patients who were being kept in forced silence will be removed and receive proper care. Those who were there legitimately will be transferred to real institutions. 3 months later, Emily and Michael were sitting on the porch of a small house in a town in rural South Carolina, watching the sunset over the mountains covered in forest. The house was on a rural property where they had established the Hope Support Center, an institution that offered free medical and psychological care for victims of sexual abuse. Another letter arrived, said Michael, handing an envelope to Emily. It was from a 40-year-old woman who had read Thomas's article and decided to denounce the priest who had abused her in childhood. She wanted to thank Emily for the courage her story had given her. "That's 47 letters this week," said Emily, carefully storing the correspondence in a box she kept in the living room. Each letter represented a life that was being transformed by the exposure of the truth. "And the center is receiving more requests for help than we can handle," added Michael. "We'll need to hire more psychologists." Emily smiled. Good problems to have. Michael stood up and knelt beside her chair, taking a small box from his pocket. "Emily, I know we've already talked about the future, but I want to make something official." Emily felt her heart race when she saw the simple but beautiful ring inside the box. "Michael, Emily Wilson, you taught me that it's possible to transform the worst experiences of life into strength to help others. You showed me that true love doesn't ignore the past, but embraces it and transforms it into something beautiful." Michael took her hand. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," said Emily without hesitation. "Yes, I want to marry you." Michael placed the ring on her finger and kissed her, a kiss full of promises and hope. When they separated, Emily looked at the ring, shining in the golden light of the late afternoon. "Michael," she said, "there's something I want to tell you." "What?" Emily smiled and placed her hand on her still flat belly. "I think our plans to have a family are going to be realized sooner than we thought." Michael was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then a huge smile spread across his face. "Are you sure?" "I took the test yesterday. Positive." Michael took her in his arms and spun her around, both laughing with joy. When he put her back on the ground, he knelt again and gently kissed her belly. "Hi, little one," he whispered. "Your daddy and your mummy have many stories to tell you when you arrive." Emily ran her hands through Michael's hair, feeling a complete happiness that she never imagined would be possible. "We're going to give this child everything we didn't have. Love, security, the certainty that they will always be protected. And we'll teach that it's possible to be strong and gentle at the same time," added Michael, standing up and embracing her. "That it's possible to face darkness and choose light." That night, they lay in the bed of the house that was now their true home, planning the wedding, talking about names for the baby, imagining what it would be like to raise a child in an environment of unconditional love. "Emily," said Michael in the darkness, "do you regret anything?" Emily thought about the question. She thought about the 15-year-old girl who had suffered a terrible trauma. She thought about the woman who had fled to Misthaven Home in search of peace. She thought about the nurse who had found courage to face her past. And she thought about the woman who was now in the arms of the man she loved, pregnant with her first child, working every day to ensure that other victims found justice. "I don't regret anything," she finally said, "because everything, even the most painful parts, brought me to you." "And brought me to our life together," agreed Michael. Outside, the night was clear and full of stars. There was no mist obscuring the view, no shadows hiding secrets. There was only clarity, honesty, and the soft sound of the wind in the trees singing a song of hope. 6 months later, Emily and Michael married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the center they had created, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and some of the victims they had helped over the months. Thomas was the best man, still carrying scars from the attack he had suffered, but determined to continue his work of exposing the truth. During the ceremony, Emily wore a simple dress that accommodated her 6-month belly, and Michael couldn't stop smiling. When they exchanged vows, both spoke about transformation, about how two broken people had found a way to become whole together. "I promise to love you not despite your history, but because of it," said Michael during the vows, "because your strength inspires me every day to be a better man. I promise to build with you a family based on true love, where our children will never doubt that they are safe, loved, and protected," responded Emily. When the justice of the hound, peace declared them husband and wife, they kissed under a shower of flower petals, knowing they had found not just love, but redemption. 2 years later, Emily held her small daughter in her lap while watching Michael play in the garden with their 1-year-old son. The children had been born a few months apart, and Michael had proved to be the caring and present father that Emily always knew he would be. "Mommy," said the older daughter, "why do you and Daddy help sad people?" Emily smiled and kissed the little blonde head of the girl. "Because sometimes people go through difficult things and need help to be happy again, like Mommy and Daddy helped each other. And now you're not sad anymore." Emily looked at Michael, who had stopped playing to listen to them, a warm smile on his face. "No, my love, now we're very, very happy." "Forever?" "Forever," confirmed Emily, knowing it was true. That night, after putting the children to bed, Emily and Michael sat on the porch as they did every night, watching the stars and talking about the day. "More requests for help arrived today," said Michael. "It seems the work never ends." "And it's good that it's that way," responded Emily. "It means people are finding courage to seek help." "Did you ever imagine when you were fleeing from Misthaven Home that we would be here today?" Emily laughed softly. "Never. At that time I could barely imagine a tomorrow, let alone a lifetime of happiness." Michael took her hand, the wedding ring shining in the soft light of the porch. "You know what impresses me most?" "What?" "How we managed to transform the worst thing that happened to us into the foundation for the best thing we built." Emily leaned in and kissed her husband, a kiss full of gratitude for everything they had overcome and built together. "Because we learned that true love isn't about forgetting the past. It's about transforming it into something that can help others. And because we found in each other exactly what we needed to heal," added Michael. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night and feeling the deep peace that came from knowing they had found their place in the world. Far from Misthaven Home, far from the secrets and pain, far from everything that had tried to destroy them, they had built a life that was exactly the opposite of everything they had suffered. It was a life based on truth instead of lies, on light instead of darkness, on love instead of fear, and it was a life that they knew they would protect and nurture for all the years they still had ahead. Misthaven Home had become just a distant memory, a place where two wounded souls met and discovered that, together, they could heal not only themselves but many other people too. And in the quietness of the night, with the wind whispering through the trees that surrounded their new home, Emily and Michael knew they were finally home, not just physically but in all the ways that really mattered. Love had won, truth had prevailed, and two people who once thought they could never be happy had discovered that happiness wasn't just possible, but inevitable, when built on solid foundations of honesty, respect, and true love. The story of Misthaven Home had ended, but the story of Emily and Michael was just beginning.